Thanks for joining today. I'm just going to give it maybe 1 minute so a few more people can join us before kicking off. But thanks very much for those of you who've come on time. Okay, I think the numbers are so let's kick off. Thanks very much for coming, everyone. Good morning and welcome to this session on interrogating costs for MMC compared with traditional. We run informal webinars for Building Better members, and off late, where a couple of years ago, quality and mortgageability felt like the biggest barriers to delivering MMC. Actually, at the moment, what our members are saying is that in the main, their boards are pretty unfussed with how a scheme is delivered as long as it is viable on cost. In fact, just yesterday, I was on a call with Jake with at least 4 other housing associations who are developing, who said that their boards support the delivery of homes using MMC, but that each scheme is still judged on its own merit. And part of that assessment includes a comparison with what it would cost to deliver the scheme traditionally. But that process of comparison isn't always straightforward. And development teams where resources stretched, or there might be a lack of confidence, or a lack of energy as well. You've got so many things to do. Knowing where to start can be tricky. So today we're going to hear from 2 consultants, Cast and Erin Millen. I'll introduce the speakers individually, and 2 housing associations, Abri and Raven Housing Trust, on what they know and what they've learned. Each of the speakers has between 3 to 5 minutes, and there'll be a chance, hopefully, for maybe a couple of questions at the end. But as usual, we've been fairly ambitious with what we can fit into 30 minutes. So the intention really is just to kick off the conversation, and we'd be really happy to discuss this in more detail after. I know that each of the speakers are also very happy for you to contact them or get in touch with us after you're interested. And we'll also record the session so you can watch it back or share it with anyone else who might be interested after as well. So first up, we have Michael Hughes, who's a director at Cast. I'll hand over to you, please, Michael.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me here today. I'm a cost consultant at Cast, working on MMC within residential use for the last 6 years, and do come up against this as a question quite regularly. And we understand that a barrier of MMC is either the perception that things are going to cost more money in the long run by going down an MMC route. Part of me is just going to confess here is that sometimes it is more money in terms of the gross construction cost, but it's the wider picture that needs to be assessed in terms of the full viability to help understand and unlock the MMC as a delivery. What I put up here is 4 key points that I'll be focusing on in the next couple of minutes: design, procurement, the build, and in the use. And each one of them, there's just a couple of questions that you probably want to take away and say, right, are we doing this, or are these the things that we need to be asking when we are considering an MMC approach? In order to get to break the barrier from an MMC design, it's really important that a standard design book taking approach from the MMC supplier is incorporated. Let's not reinvent wheels. Let's use opportunities that the lessons that they've already learned from the suppliers in order to deliver a product which is more off the shelf, but can be tailored to your individual kind of looks and feels and fit outs that's required. It's also important to ask the question when you're looking at the costs is the analysis of performance and the gap. We are seeing more and more from the tightening of building regulations and the performance of MMC, whether it's Cat 1 or Cat 2, outperforming a traditional approach in terms of air tightness and the sustainability credentials that are coming through and required. If those were to be brought up on a traditional, you're all of a sudden seeing a closer cost differential between those 2 aspects. Thirdly, in terms of design, it's really important that we ask the question is, why are we doing it? And let's not maximize MMC and maximize PMV. When you're looking at a project, it will fail if you say, let's do the most greatest PMV or pre-manufactured value on a project. Not all projects are going to be applicable for Cat 1 installation. So let's look to optimize. Let's look at seeing what Cat 2 systems are available across the schemes, because you may become too costly for a Cat 1 system on a project. You then go into the procurement. It's important that there's a disintermediation of the supply chain, a breakdown as to who is involved, and this is where Building Better obviously come into play for MMC. It's the breaking out and removal of on cost, and it's making sure that all your construction partners are aligned in there. You will see that some traditional contractors will see it as a risk rather than an opportunity, and therefore be applying additional risk factors and the same on costs and prelims on their build. And it's really important to align with contractors who recognize the opportunity of an MMC delivery, that those on costs are not being multiplied up as they come to site. In terms of the procurement, the viability equation, a couple of ups and downs on here. Obviously, going through an MMC approach, it's really important to understand the cash flow and the overall duration of the program. The likelihood is there's going to be greater pressure for upfront costs coming through. So important that we figure that within the viability, but the end product should be coming out at the end at a quicker period of time. I'll quickly go on to builds. It's really important that we're questioning the cost split of the building in terms of cost envelope. What I mean by that, there's going to be 3 pots that you need to interrogate. There's from the factory, if it's a Cat 1 supplier, what is being delivered, so that it doesn't get disguised within the full net construction cost, so that there's a clear differential between the on-site and the off-site delivery. The on-site being tailored to ensuring that they are focused on just the products that they're needing to deliver. So if it is a Cat 1 system, we are trying to be lean within that delivery of the substructures that are required, and any zipping up it is coming on. And also then the critical, the detailed prelim book that would associate with that. So the management, and it's getting away from that base percentage basis that is going to be on within the construction. It needs to be down back at NRM level, broken down management, logistics and the likes for a prelim book, to ensure that there is no fats and duplication of management within there. And one last on critical path program, we are seeing more and more that getting all the benefits of an MMC delivery on the house, but if we lose the focus on the other key areas within the build, such as logistics, the main infrastructures coming into the site, particularly the power coming on live, it will erode any of that program benefit that may have come by going down an MMC approach. Locating incoming supplies to an outside housing unit for the house, so that they can come in earlier or prior to the main houses. Really important to ensure that that critical path program is generated as a benefit. And ensuring that in the use, understanding that what we are actually buying is a more sustainable and greater product that's coming through in terms of air tightness and potentially some of the materiality that's being used in there to a traditional. Make sure that we are understanding that, and life cycle costing is going to become more and more focused and important, rather than the initial construction cost. So making sure that we take everything on board. And our last bit of slogan there, assessment of better project outcomes. It's not always, I know that today is about viability and cost, but there's going to be greater cost certainty, greater cost program certainty, and benefits on site by going down an MMC approach. waste being reduced and other aspects of on-site benefits that are going to be generated. So I think I've probably gone over slightly there, Trina, apologies for that, but there's a whistle-stop tour.
No, incredibly comprehensive presentation in a very short amount of time. Thank you, Michael. I'm going to hand over to John Murray, who is a director and senior partner at Erie Miller. Just before you start speaking, John, just a reminder to everyone that hopefully there'll be time for questions. So do pop any questions into the Q&A or in the chat. And if we don't have a chance to pick them up today, I will make sure we get a response out in the email that we send round with the link. Over to you, John.
Rina, thanks very much. Thanks, Michael. There. What I'm going to do is pick up on some of the bits and pieces Michael had mentioned about getting the successful delivery of MMC. What I'm going to do is talk about category 1. That's where our greatest experience is in Erie Miller. I think we've got on site this year 500 dwellings being constructed on site through full volumetric through different manufacturers, and more on the design side coming forward. So I'm going to look at the successful delivery on sites. I think we all know a number of different manufacturers, and we can see the success of how that they know their numbers within the factory, bringing the quality forward, bringing the energy efficiency of their buildings forward, how they zip them up on site. They understand that quite considerably, and how they finish that product for you. But what I would just want to have a look at and make sure that one of the things we spend a lot more time on during the MMC form of construction is that front end infrastructure prelim side that Michael's talking about, making sure you understand who their supply chain is, interrogate them. Do they understand MMC? Have they got their experience? The manufacturers are going all across the country providing their product, which is why we do MMC. Because the labour can be concentrated on there, but when they're using different supply chains in different areas, we've got to make sure that they're comfortable with what they are providing and doing for the manufacturers. So we look to interrogate the costs associated with the infrastructure, as Michael said, and making sure it's not duplicated anywhere within the manufacturer's costs, but making sure that right from the outset, even if the manufacturer's not coming to site for another 6, 7, 8 weeks, months, that we start that process with the supply chain and pre-contract meeting as if the manufacturer were there, because sometimes it's left to a contractor to get on with the site. Making sure that they have the proper due diligence for the combination of the two coming forward of manufacturing and construction. The program has to be the critical path that Michael spoke about earlier. Why is it more important than traditional build? Because if the infrastructure program slows down, the build process slows down in a traditional. But what we have on one of our sites is units coming to site in advance because they needed away from the factory in advance of the infrastructure being there. We assumed that was going to be the case in this particular scheme, and we had actually designated an area of the site that would be set aside for laying down before they were lifted back onto their foundations. But you do need to have a look at that as a cost implication, and where that is, because obviously, are you paying for the unit coming onto site as installed? Michael spoke also about not just the on-site, is look at that critical path on other services coming in, so that when you do bring their unit on, you are connecting it up and it's ready to go. So the detailed due diligence and the cost associated with stuff outside the manufacturer stuff is what we really would like you to concentrate on when you're bringing forward your project, and that is more so than traditional. So that was about 4 minutes there. Trina, I'll pass back to you and the team.
Thanks very much, John. It's really helpful, practical advice, I think, for people about to embark. I'm going to now turn to the Housing Association colleagues we've got in the room to share some of their practical feedback and experience of what it's like to try and do these viability assessments or kind of feedback from their teams. And first up, we have Jake, who's Head of Partnerships and Innovation at Abri Group. Jake, over to you.
Thanks, Gina. Hi, everyone. So really interesting, the last two speakers, and I think you'll see some sort of common themes. But I guess from my perspective, I'm going to try to put some practical or lived experience kind of and what we're sort of looking at, and some of the areas that we're really trying to investigate and interrogate, as both Michael and John kind of aim towards as well. So fundamentally, there is, this is still new for many. We know how to unpack a traditional build kind of contract, and that confidence is building, but actually that understanding and what's included, what's not included, has this organization or has that manufacturer kind of done enough due diligence on that side to kind of understand their costs. And I guess I'm going to focus on both Cat 1 and Cat 2 and give you some kind of real practical kind of things to look at. So Category 1, as an example, is an interesting offer because generally that offering is a turnkey solution, i.e. above ground, you get your home, they give you the keys and you walk away. But actually, when you're interrogating them costs, it's fundamentally you need to know how you split the kind of construction sum analysis up between the below ground and above ground. But there's quite a nuance with the Category 1 in the fact that the floor slab is actually included within the Category 1 products by and large. There's some that are not. So actually, when you're interrogating these costs, you need to make sure that your cost consultant knows and remove some of these sections from your sort of costing. So i.e. a chunk of money from the groundworks and a chunk of money from your sort of your internal kind of floor slab kind of elements. And then we talk about Category 2, and currently we have our own in-house build team, Abri Build, and we are on the journey to diversification. So we're looking at a site at the moment, some 100 units, and we're looking to deliver that in Category 2. The reason behind that is because it's got planning, and we know that Category 1 will be very difficult to kind of to get onto that particular site because the planning is already in play. But Category 2 can be very versatile. You can actually build and create these products to suit any sort of planning and some planning conditions. The challenges with Category 2 is actually really understanding how you interrogate the cost, what's included, what's not, how much their offering is. So some manufacturers will offer what they determine as a turnkey solution, but when you dive into it, actually the painting and decorating is not included, the kitchen's not included, etc., etc., etc. So I think that the point from me is actually ensuring that you get a cost consultant on board really, really early days, making sure that you draw out your CSA and you almost do any site line by line, so you can really interrogate those costs. What's included? What are you paying for? You might have a manufacturer that gives you a price per square meter. You kind of put that onto your appraisal and it looks great, but actually there's other elements that are not included. There's a lot of soft or assumed benefits as well that we do anticipate will happen in time with MMC, the more mature that the sort of industry becomes across all kind of disciplines. But in terms of program management, speed of delivery, how long scaffolding will be up for, etc. We at Abri are actually applying the sort of same program rationale at the moment as traditional, just principally because them assumptions are not the actual true benefits. We're not seeing that yet. So what we hope we'll see when we deliver these sites is actually that reduction in our prelims, that reduction in our scaffolding costs, etc. Michael also mentioned about the performance of these properties, and that's a very difficult kind of viability assessment to assess. So generally, we do see that all MMC products, or the majority that we see, are significantly higher in performing than any traditional build. So actually applying some rationale and some costing behind that is down to each and every individual, but it's what that organization's desire is, say, to deliver future home standards or net zero carbon in operation. I've also got on my notes grant as well. So there is grant that sits behind MMC. So as Michael said, sometimes these solutions are more expensive, but there is grant that does sit behind that can help move these sites forward and help facilitate a more viable scheme. So that's a little bit from me. I'll pass over back to Trina. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jake. It's a lot packed in actually in a short couple of minutes. So thank you very much for that. And I'm just about to hand over to Sandeep, but just before I do that, I think probably everyone on the call knows this, but just so that everyone's definitely on the same page, quickly, MMC category 1 and category 2 that Jake were referring to. Category 1 is your volumetric or your modular solutions or houses or units, and category 2 is your panelized solutions. I'll just with that very, very basic definition and explanation, I will hand over to Sandeep. Thank you.
Thanks, Trina. Good morning, all. Trina's asked me to give a brief overview of how Raven are using the Building Better framework and the cost benefit viability we as an organization envisage to see from it. So from my current experience of using the framework, it's allowed Raven to really streamline projects to drive those efficiencies whilst adhering to the organizational governance and procurement processes. For example, we've been able to engage with manufacturers from the concept stage to identify if a site is deliverable from a logistics perspective for a Cat 1 product. And if so, we've swiftly been able to move into selecting house types from the manufacturer's catalogues and put indicative design proposals together. And manufacturers have been able to provide high-level indicative costs for those. And this has really helped to form a financial appraisal and develop a business plan for approval. From a cost viability perspective, it is really comforting in knowing that manufacturers know the actual cost of building out the units, and these are set as part of the framework agreement. The indicative costs are more around the substructures and any abnormalities, but these can be firmed up later down the line. Whereas in traditional build, costings can be ambiguous, especially due to the current volatility in the market. And during the initial stages, where estimates provided by contractors can be optimistic biased, as a project is developed, those costs can be inflamed and they could cause cost viability issues. So we've started to see MMC costings coming in par with traditional build when comparing the overall cost savings of a scheme. The costings provided by manufacturers are around 2,750 to around 3,200 per square metre. But that's not taking into account any site-specific abnormalities such as major drain diversions. So as an organisation, we aspire to achieving low to net zero carbon on the units built by the manufacturers, and they also are more firmly efficient. So it helps to achieve this, and the uplifting cost is around about 5,000 per unit. So saving on costs are, for example, on M&E consultants, architects, as the detailed designs for each of the units are already set. There's also savings on interest as we anticipate a shorter development period during the construction stage, as well as efficiencies in streamlining processes, as the framework allows you to select a manufacturer from the outset. So that tendering process is a lot shorter compared to the traditional build. So, for example, if you had a site that's already got a build, is occupied by a building, the cost of rates and security can quickly mount up. And that if you don't have those efficiencies in place, that can have a financial impact on the scheme. So just to summarize, because I know we're quite short on time, we're able to engage with manufacturers early. We could directly call off from the framework. It allows efficiencies in the processes and governance. Prices are set on house types, selected including specifications. But as Jake mentioned, you got to break down the details and find out exactly what's included in that. And it also meets NDSS and M2 standards, and avoiding those uncertainties in costs. The house types are compliant with building regulations, and the PMV meets the Homes England hurdle rates of 55% and over. So that's just to give you a brief overview of Raven's experience of using the framework and some of the cost benefits that we've hoping to achieve. I shall now pass back to Trina to conclude the webinar.
Thanks very much, Sandeep. I think maybe we have time for 1 or 2 questions. So just a reminder that you can put your question into the Q&A or the chat. And in the meantime, I've actually got a question, a different question for the housing associations than for Erie, Miller and Cast. For Jake and Sandeep, you both kind of talked about sort of just digging into the numbers, digging into the details. Like, how do you practically do that? What do you look at? What are the tools that you use to do that? And so if you just very briefly kind of explain the process you'd go through. And I might actually hold off on my second question because we've got a question from the audience. So yeah, if I could quickly come to you, Jake, maybe to answer that question. How do you practically dig into numbers, or Sandeep either, before going on to the question we've got in the chat?
Of course. Fundamentally, you need to get a very itemized construction sum analysis and really start to interrogate that. So for the category 1, where primarily you're going to get a tried and tested product above ground, actually you can get a above ground, it's going to cost you X per square meter. I think Top Hat and both ILCO, who are on the framework, are somewhere in the region of about 1350 a square meter above ground, and that's delivered, installed, etc. Then you'd have to add on your groundworks, your abnormals, etc., etc. When you go into the category 2, that's when it gets a bit more challenging. So really identifying and getting a cost consultant that knows what they're looking for, but really kind of doing it together and itemizing it, and speaking to people like Building Better or Cast to really understand where are those nuanced areas maybe where we need to dig a little bit deeper.
John, did you want to come in as well on that question?
Yeah, just obviously you've done a lot of work on understanding the MMC element of costing, where the abnormal side of it, the infrastructure. What we would like to do, what Jake mentioned about the contract sum analysis, we like to work with the supply chain and look at their package prices, go look at the tendered prices, ask the manufacturers if we can be party to those complete scope of services before they go out, to make sure that we understand where individual costs lie, and then sit down with them and scrutinize the tender returns with the package deals and the supply chain. Yeah.
Thanks very much, John. We've got quite a few questions. So if it's okay, and I checked this with the speakers already that they're happy to stay in for an extra 5 minutes, but those of you who do have to leave, that's absolutely fine. I'll fire the questions at all of you, and if you can answer, I think I know who will be able to answer what. So the first one from John Spencer, percentage-wise, how many clients look at whole life cycle costs instead of just build costs, as most RPs or housing associations manage the assets after completed? Maybe this is a question for Michael or John. A second question for Jake. Have Homes England actually confirmed additional grant available for MMC schemes to assist? And then I'll get to the third one after. Michael, you were nodding. Can I come to you first?
There we go, unmuted myself. I'm going to do second first. Yeah, we sat with Homes England to help set up their MMC grant scheme. So it's if you have one, if you're doing Cat 1 or Cat 2 or above 55%, there's additional funding. But I think you need to get onto the board in order to get that unlocked. In terms of the life cycle costing, it is something we have seen over the last year. I can't probably put percentages on it, but from our clients, it is more pressing as a sustainability credentials aspect, as part of their sustainability delivery that they're trying to do. So life cycle costing is becoming more and more a prerequisite as part of our cost analysis. So I wouldn't be able to say a percentage, but it has definitely increased over the last year.
John, did you want to add anything at all, or?
Very similar to Michael's view that we've been looking at whole life costings ever since the HCA used to ask us about whole life costings. We've got a number of our clients that really do want a detailed whole life cost and management cost for them. but it's stepped up again another level because of the energy. They're looking at that as well as the whole life costing. So MMC really does tick those boxes much better.
Thank you. We've got the last question before I wrap up the webinar, which is, thank you, Derek, for your question from Citizen Housing. Currently working on a scheme with a modular provider, 24 new homes. Their second modular scheme, utilising NEC contracts. And this seems to fit in with manufacturing as a contract rather than JCT due to programme priority, etc. It would be really interesting to know from the housing providers what type of contracts they are utilising to help build that programme and cost element. Anyone here who'd like to answer this would be really helpful, please.
I can come in there. We've got a number of contracts. We've got the JCT, NEC and development agreements. Obviously the payment provisions in all of them have to completely change from manufacturing, but I agree with Derek that the NEC definitely lends itself much better to the whole coming together of construction and manufacturing than the JCT contracts.
If I can add something, actually, from feedback from members and from our manufacturing partners, my sense is that manufacturing partners are also maybe a bit fed up of the JCT, but they also don't want to create a completely different form of contract that's going to put housing associations and local authorities up. It's just another barrier. It feels to me there is an opportunity to have an MMC specific contract, and maybe that's the type of thing Building Better can look at, because you are kind of doing it as a group, and so in theory sort of sharing in some of the risks with trying something a bit more novel. So it feels like there's definitely an opportunity to do things a little bit differently. Does anyone have anything else they want to add before I wrap up?
I think there's appetite there, but it's all new. So do we want to, go down the sort of the new contracting world where there isn't a huge amount of experience, certainly from our perspective, and, stick with something that we know, and I was going to say love, but I don't know if that's the right word, but certainly know, and maybe just, fit it into a contract that we all can understand at the moment. But yeah, the appetite is absolutely there to change that.
I would support it. I think you will start seeing, particularly the category 1 turnkey suppliers, providing their own bespoke kind of contracts, which we can then, a bit like their product, take it off the shelf and apply it to it. So, but I think it's one step at a time on that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Everyone also stuck around, which is great because you all had really interesting things to say. So a massive thank you to everyone who joined. Thank you to the speakers, John, Michael, Jake, and Sandeep. And also a very big thank you to Lucinda, who's got her camera off, but has done all the organizing behind the scenes. There'll be a really, really short survey just after we end the call. So I'd be really appreciative if you could just stay for 10 extra seconds to answer that. Please feel free to get in touch. Like I said at the beginning, we'll send around the link. I'll check with the speakers if they don't mind sending around their single slides as well. We can share that with you as well. Thank you. And yeah, have a really good day, everyone. Bye.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.